The storm rolled across the Texas plains like a wounded beast, dragging sheets of cold rain behind it as if the sky itself were trying to wash away every secret it had ever held. And somewhere in the middle of that restless, endless darkness, a trembling girl named Lila stumbled barefoot through the mud, clutching her torn backpack against her chest as if it were the only anchor she still had in a world that had thrown her away. She didn't know where she was running anymore, only that she had to keep going, that she couldn't stop, that if the men chasing her caught even a glimpse of her, everything she had suffered to escape would be for nothing. So when she saw the old, leaning silhouette of a weather-beaten barn rising out of the storm, like a ghost from forgotten centuries, she didn't hesitate for a second, pushing her weakened legs forward until she reached the wide wooden doors, slipping inside just as headlights cut across the far-off road behind her. And breathlessly, collapsing behind a stack of hay, Bales's thunder shook the rafters above. The barn smelled of earth, dust, and old wood. But there was a comfort in it, too, a grounded hum that felt like safety for the first time in days. And as Lila pressed her hand over her mouth to quiet her shivering breaths, she had no idea that the barn belonged to a man known across the county only by whispered nicknames: the Giant, the Quiet One, the Cowboy with no smile, the man who lived alone at the edge of the world and wanted nothing to do with anyone or anything except his horses, his land, and the memories he never spoke of. Memories that had carved the silence into his voice and the heaviness into his shoulders. That man, Caleb Hart, 6'7", with a frame built out of years of lifting logs, saddles and sorrow, didn't usually check the barn at night. But something about the storm tugged at him. An instinct, or maybe just the ghost of loneliness nudging him to step outside and make sure everything on his property was still standing. So with a lantern in hand and his boots sinking into the soaked earth, he approached the barn doors and pushed them open, letting a gust of wind blow out the quiet inside as the horses stirred nervously. And Lila felt her heart stop because the footsteps were too heavy, too slow, too purposeful to belong to one of the men hunting her. This was someone else, and for all she knew, someone far more dangerous. She tried to press herself deeper behind the hay, but her soaked clothes made a squishing sound when she moved. And in the cavernous hush of the barn, Caleb heard it immediately, raising his lantern higher and calling out in a gravel-worn drawl that vibrated through the wooden beams. "Who's there?" Just 2 words, but they felt like thunder to Lila, who froze completely, eyes wide, breath locked in her chest, praying he wouldn't find her. But the beam of his lantern fell over her curled, trembling shape, and he stiffened, eyes narrowing as he saw what looked like a ghost of a girl hiding where no girl should be at this hour. For a long moment, he didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even breathe loud enough for Lila to hear. And then slowly he crouched down. Though even crouching, he looked impossibly massive, a living wall of muscle, denim and quiet power, and in that low, soft voice of his he asked, "You hurt?" Not harsh, not accusing, just an honest question that felt so impossibly gentle it almost made her cry. And when she didn't answer, he added, "Ain't gonna throw you out into a storm like this. Just need to know if I need a doctor." That was the moment Lila broke, whispering hoarsely, "Please don't call anyone, please." And Caleb saw the terror etched into her face. Terror so raw and deep it looked older than she was, older than the storm outside, and something in him fractured a little. He wasn't a savior, never had been, but he couldn't look at a scared, broken thing and turn away either. So he sighed, set the lantern down, and said, "All right then, start from the beginning, or don't if it hurts too much. Just tell me the part where I help." Lila shook her head, hugging her knees as trembling sobs escaped her. And she managed to whisper that she had run away from people who weren't supposed to find her, that they might be coming after her. And she just needed somewhere to hide for one night, just one night before she kept running again. Caleb's jaw flexed, that protective instinct he thought he'd buried years ago, surfacing like a beast waking up from a long sleep, and he muttered, Ain't nobody chasing a girl in this kind of panic for a good reason. Before offering her his coat, which looked like a blanket on her small frame. And then he heard it, the distant rumble of a truck on the gravel road leading to his property. Headlights cutting through the rain, moving slowly, deliberately hunting. Lila's eyes shot up in terror, and Caleb knew instantly these were the people she feared. The kind that didn't knock politely or leave quietly. And in that second, with the storm raging and danger approaching, he made a decision he couldn't take back. Pushing open the barn door just enough to peer outside and seeing 2 men stepping out of a truck. Flashlights scanning the fields, calling out over the storm that they were looking for someone and just needed to ask a few questions. Liars, both of them. Caleb could tell by the edge in their voices, the heavy hands resting too naturally on their belts. The kind of men who weren't here for a chat. He closed the barn door quietly, turned back to Lila, and said words he never imagined would come out of his mouth. "If they ask you're here, you're my wife. Understand?" "My wife?" Lila's lips parted in shock. Wife? But there was no time to process it. And when Caleb saw her panic, he gently but firmly took her hand and added, "A married woman has a right to be anywhere on this ranch, and no bastard's gonna take another man's wife without a fight." Before she could reply, the men knocked loudly on the front porch of the farmhouse, and Caleb straightened, becoming someone else entirely, a protector, a wall, a storm just as fierce as the one outside. Then he pulled Lila close, shielding her small frame behind him, and whispered, "Stay quiet. Stay close. I won't let anyone touch you. Not while you're under my roof." And as the thunder cracked above them, Lila felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety, hope, the distant heartbeat of a future she never imagined. And she knew, in that single trembling moment, that nothing about this night, this storm, or this giant cowboy would ever be the same again. The knocking grew harder, each slam echoing through the storm-soaked night as Caleb stepped out of the barn, with the calm, heavy stride of a man who didn't fear trouble, but had lived through enough to recognize its scent a mile away. He told Lila to stay behind the shadows of the doorway, and she clutched his oversized coat, trembling as she watched him approach the porch where the 2 men waited, their flashlights slicing through the darkness like knives. "Evening," Caleb said with that low, steady voice that carried the weight of a man who rarely spoke but never lied. And the men exchanged glances, realizing the ranch belonged to someone far larger and far less intimidatable than they'd expected. "We're looking for a girl," the taller one said, forcing a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thin, young, about this high. Might have run through this way." Caleb leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms, letting his size speak before his words did. "Ain't seen anyone," he replied simply, and Lila held her breath because she could feel how close the men were, how easily they could walk past him and search the barn, how quickly her fragile freedom could shatter. The second man stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Mind if we take a look around?" he asked, and the fake politeness in his tone dissolved into something sharper. "Actually," Caleb said, pushing off the doorframe, "I do mind. This here's private property. Nobody goes anywhere unless I say." His voice didn't rise, didn't threaten, but something in it made both men stiffen. "Why are you so nervous about a simple look?" The shorter one snapped. Caleb's jaw flexed. "'Cause my wife's sleeping inside," he said smoothly, the lie rolling out with shocking ease. "And I ain't about to drag her into anybody's nonsense this late." The men froze. "Your wife?" the taller one repeated. Caleb nodded once. "You need something else?" The storm crackled overhead like an exclamation point to his warning. Lila's heart slammed against her ribs. Wife. He'd said it again, as if it were real, as if she belonged to someone for the first time in her life. Not as property, but as someone worth protecting. The men hesitated, realizing picking a fight with a giant cowboy on a dark, isolated ranch was a decision stupid enough to make headlines. Finally, the taller one muttered, "If you see her, you call us." Caleb didn't blink. "If anyone trespasses again, I'll call the sheriff," he said flatly. And the men exchanged a look before backing off. climbing into their truck and disappearing into the rain. Only when the sound faded did Caleb exhale, shoulders loosening as he walked back to the barn. Lila stepped toward him, eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. You lied for me," she whispered, voice breaking, and Caleb shook his head gently. "Did what needed doing," he said. "Ain't about lying. It's about keeping you safe." She swallowed hard, tears gathering, because no one had ever spoken about her safety like it mattered. Caleb grabbed a blanket from the tack room and draped it over her shoulders, guiding her deeper into the warmest stall where the horses huffed softly, sensing her fear. "You can stay here tonight," he said quietly. "Ain't nobody gonna touch you while I'm around." Lila nodded, feeling something inside her thaw for the first time in years. Trust. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked. Caleb paused, looking at her with eyes that held more loneliness than a man should carry. "'Cause once," he said, "someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. Vigor, it's my turn." As she lay down on the soft hay, wrapped in the warmth of a blanket and the strange new safety of a cowboy's promise, Lila realized that her running might finally be over, not because the danger had passed, but because she had found someone willing to stand between her and the world. And far off in the night, long after the storm calmed, Caleb stayed awake outside the stall, leaning against the door like a silent guardian, making sure that nothing, not fear, not storms, not ghosts of her past, would ever come close to her again.